Hello and welcome, students. This is going to be a quick overview on the basics of Beat Detective. In a later video, we'll get into the real tweaky, detailed stuff. But I wanted to do a shorter version that was just going to kind of present to you the basics of how everything works, so that we can get into the more advanced stuff with sort of a basic understanding of what we're looking at here. So, to start off, we can see that I have a stereo drum file. I'm gonna play that back for you so we can take a quick listen and just talk for a second about what it sounds like, what we're gonna do with it, so on and so forth. So let me let it rip. Okay, so we hear it's a high energy rock. The drumming's quite good. The player's already very tight. So that certainly makes our lives a little bit easier. Aesthetically, I might not necessarily want to put this thing 100% on a grid like metronomic as though it were played by a machine, but it's exactly what we're going to do right now, just for the purposes of demonstration. Some genres of music call for really rigidly edited performances, and others allow for some sort of natural feel. So this would be an example of probably something that I'd maybe leave a little bit more natural, but for the purposes of demonstration, we're going to go totally crazy on it and just quantize the heck out of it. So first thing we're going to do is we need to open up Beat Detective, which if you are on a full-sized keyboard, you can use the command and the numeric keypad. Number 8 is the key command for that. I am currently on my laptop, so I'm going to have to go up to the event menu here, and you'll find Beat Detective lurking in that menu. So click on that. We've got Beat Detective. Generally, I think when you open it up, it'll appear something kind of like this. And I'm going to give you a quick rundown on what the different sections mean, what they're asking of you as the user, and some ways that we will be manipulating them to further our desires, needs, I don't know, whatever, to make the drums do what we want them to do. Quick first thing to note is that the song was recorded to a click. A song doesn't need to be recorded to a click track in order to use Beat Detective, but it makes it a heck of a lot easier. So the click in this case was set to 205 beats per minute. We can see our tempo up there in the tempo timeline of Pro Tools. And as I said, the drummer's pretty on it. Again, that's going to make our lives easier when we start to edit this thing. So the first thing I want to just call your attention to is if I make this selection here, we're going to see that according to Pro Tools, the selection begins at bar 15, beat number 2, and 349th tick. That's going to be just a little bit shy of an eighth note, right? So it's just kind of right in the middle of some random beat. Similarly, it ends at bar 38, beat number 2, tick 579. That's a little bit after an eighth note. So again, right smack randomly in the middle of a beat. And in order for Beat Detective to work, we need to define the selection of audio that we're working in. So we can press Capture Selection here, and you'll notice that Beat Detective has rounded from bar 15, beat 2, tick 349. It is rounded down simply to bar 15, beat 2. And my ending point has been rounded up from beat 2 of bar 38, tick number 579, all the way up to beat number 3 of bar 38. This could be a problem because if Beat Detective understands the audio to be an eighth note or so different from where it actually exists on the Pro Tools timeline when you tell it to conform the audio clips that we're going to create to the timeline. That is to say, when you tell Beat Detective to quantize, it might put them in the wrong spot because its selection is off by roughly an eighth note. So what I encourage you to do in your worldly drum editing travels is to make a selection exactly on a quarter note, all right? So we can set ourselves to grid mode here. You press F4 on your keyboard, that'll give you grid mode. And we make a selection, and we can just highlight and remove the audio on that side. Zip over to the end of our file. We can trim the audio back here to exactly a quarter note. I should mention real quick that this song actually goes on a couple minutes longer. That's why there's a hard cut in the middle of the performance. I just wanted to reduce its size for our purposes here. Anywho, the end result in this case is that when I make the selection, it begins exactly on bar 16, it ends exactly on bar 38, and when I press capture over here, it is going to correctly capture that piece of audio. So far, so good. The other thing you need to do, both when capturing audio and when making edits within Beat Detective, is let Beat Detective know what kind of musical material there is in this selection. So you'll notice here it says contains. We're going to select, does it contain eighth notes, quarter notes, 16th notes, 32nd notes? That is a way for Beat Detective to better guess at what the various transients in the drum performance are trying to do. If it knows that the drummer's only playing eighth notes, it won't accidentally assign a really early or really late hit to a 16th note, right? Because it knows that you're only having an eighth note in that particular performance. So we'll just take a quick listen. I'm looking at the counter here. This is where the tempo's set, and listening back, it sounds to me like eighth notes. Okay, he hits a couple 16th notes in that drum fill, but I would encourage you all to plan for some manual editing when you're using Beat Detective, particularly at drum fills. And you know what'll happen is if you select 16th notes here, it's going to add a lot of extra markers in there, and it's also going to potentially flag something as a 16th note when it should have been an eighth note. And if that happens a bunch of times, you end up actually wasting time correcting those errors that Beat Detective has made, versus having to correct for this one drum fill. Should Beat Detective accidentally screw something up with the eighth note designation? Again, there's eighth note. We're telling it there's only eighth notes in here, but there is a 16th note in this drum fill, so there's a chance that there's going to be a mistake there. But for the rest of the performance is eighth notes. So you're kind of you're playing the odds a little bit here. You're saying, all right, it's mostly eighth notes. And if Beat Detective screws up something with this drum fill, well, at least I only have to fix that one spot, as opposed to telling Beat Detective that this thing is filled with 16th notes, and now maybe you've got to fix lots of mistakes. So we're going to stick with the eighth note thing. We've made our selection, we say capture, and now we press analyze. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. I'm going to turn the sensitivity up, and you'll see as I turn it up, we get more and more purple lines. Those purple lines are transients that Beat Detective has identified. So if I zoom in, you'll see that each one of these purple lines corresponds to what looks like a thing that is probably a drum hit. All right, now at this point, I would encourage you to turn on this option here, show trigger time. You'll note now at the bottom of the screen, at the bottom of the purple line, there is a timestamp for each one of those transients that is detected. This is extremely useful because it is a way for you to not only get a sense of what Beat Detective is seeing in the drum performance or hearing in the drum performance, but it also allows you to double check against the timeline up here that Beat Detective is more or less assigning the correct timestamps to the correct intended place on the timeline. So we can see here the drummer's a little bit early, but Beat Detective has still correctly identified the corresponding transient. So we're looking pretty good here. I don't normally rigorously go through each one of these. I would look for potential problem areas. So that 16th note drum fill that I mentioned earlier, we're going to take a look at it here, and we'll see that this is this right here is the middle note of a 16th note, but Beat Detective has identified it as an 8th note. 480 is 8th note. Eventually you will come to memorize all of those things. So I need to tell Beat Detective that no, in fact, that is not the 8th note. The 8th note is the transient that occurred just before it. And Beat Detectives can be kind of smart. If I delete this purple line, which I do by holding down Option, and you'll see that my hand icon down there now has a negative symbol. That's because it's going to remove or subtract that purple marker. I click on the purple marker, and away it goes. Sometimes Beat Detective will do this really cool thing where it will try to make a second guess about the nearest correct timestamp. So sometimes when you erase an incorrect marker, it will put a purple line at the next nearest transient with the same timestamp. It didn't do that this time, so we're going to have to put one in manually. We can put one in manually by holding Control and clicking down here, and you see I've got this line now that I can move around a little bit. I'm going to put that on the transient. It has correctly identified the timestamp, and we're looking pretty good. Here's a cool tip. I have my grid set to 8th notes. I have Beat Detective looking for 8th notes. That means every one of these purple lines should land roughly on the grid. If I scroll through and see one that's way far off, that would indicate to me that Beat Detective has probably misidentified a 16th note as an 8th note, which is what happened in that earlier drum fill. Doing a quick visual check here, I can see that that is not the case. So we're looking pretty good. Next step in Beat Detective is going to be to zoom way in, and we've got this scroll next button. And what that does is it scrolls one purple line at a time all the way through the entire selection. You're going to do this to make sure that all your purple lines actually land on transients. You'll notice when I get to this one, it's a little bit early. So I can just grab it, slide it over. Now it's more on the transient, and we're going to carry on. This part is exceedingly dull, but it's massively important. If you skip this step, you will certainly end up making more work for yourself later down the line, and it is work that is much, much harder to fix. These are pretty easy to fix. It's also an opportunity to double check that the timestamps are aligning correctly with your grid. I can see here this one's suspiciously late, so I'm going to just zoom out and listen and see if it sounds like it was a 16th note. It was not. It was just a good old-fashioned late kick drum, so no problem there. All right, we're going to scroll on through, and I'm making you all suffer with me. All right, we're all in this together. Just be thankful it's not an entire song. By the way, if you get good at this, I think you can appreciate why this is exactly the sort of work that professionals like to farm out to their young new assistant engineers, because it's tedious and painfully dull, and we all hate doing it. So get good at this, and your prospects for employment will increase considerably. Speaking of getting good at things, this is something that you'll probably hear me say in class a bunch, but I've got this philosophy, which is figure out the things that you most hate to do and then get really good at them. And the reason why is because when you get really good at them, you can do them faster and with less effort. And then you have to spend less time on the things that you don't like doing. All right, now I just realized I forgot to mention what the analysis algorithm does. This is important, and I apologize. I'm going to go over it real quick right now. The low emphasis is going to look at low frequency transients. The high emphasis is going to look at high frequency transients. So low emphasis would be something like the shells of your drum kit, kick, snare, toms. Okay. High emphasis would be would be more sensitive to things like cymbals, your hi-hats, your crash, your ride. Then there's this thing called enhanced resolution, which frankly I've never gotten along with very well, so I simply don't use it. But it is meant to be some kind of enhanced version of the existing algorithms. I usually have the best luck doing drums with low emphasis. We're going to talk more about this control later, so I'm deliberately glossing over it right now. We'll get a deep dive in on that, I promise. But for the purposes of editing a stereo drum track, low emphasis, totally cool. Frankly, any of these would probably work. You might get slightly different placement of the purple line, the transient, and what it identifies, but on a stereo file, they'll all work pretty well. Okay, moving on. Purple lines have all been double checked. We scrolled to next. Everything was looking good. Next thing I want to call your attention to is this trigger pad. Right now it's set to 6 milliseconds. What that means is that when I tell Beat Detective to make its separation, every one of those purple lines is going to get a cut. But the trigger pad tells Beat Detective to place the cut 6 milliseconds before the purple line. This is very handy for preserving the integrity of the transients. This is something that I'll talk about in more detail. But for now, I would just encourage you to set it to, 15 milliseconds seems pretty good. And now, when I press separate, you'll notice that the cut is 15 milliseconds before the purple line. All right. So when I zoom out, you're going to see that every single one of those transients has now gotten a cut. Okay. Pretty cool. Now we switch from clip separation to clip conform. And now the magic happens. Remember, it's set to eighth notes, which means it is going to quantize according to an eighth note. We can set the strength to whatever we want. If you set it to 100, that is the exact same result as leaving it blank. And I'm going to skip over exclude and swing for now. These are things that we will get into on a deep dive at some point. But for now, let's just hard quantize all those transients right to a grid. So I can either select strength at 100%, or I can deselect strength altogether. And now let's take a listen to the result. Great, it's right on the grid, and you can hear that drum fill even survived, which is very cool. That's because we did that our diligence with the scrolling around, looking at all of our markers, making sure everything was on point. But if you listen, you can probably hear some gaps in the audio, because you'll see that when the clips were conformed, it left some holes in there. So let's listen to that. You'll hear that going by, I'm sure. All right, so the holes aren't too bad. That's because this drummer is really, really tight. The less accurate the drummer is, the more Beat Detective needs to move the audio, and the more Beat Detective needs to move the audio, the bigger the resulting gap will be. So, as you work with Beat Detective a bunch, you'll start to come up with some workarounds and some strategies for dealing with that. But we're fortunate here to have a solid drum performance that just didn't need to get moved too much. Before I move on, I'm going to show you the strength control in brief, just to give you a quick idea what it's doing. So I'm going to press undo. That puts our audio back to its unedited state, although the slices are all still there. And remember that if I tell it to conform, it moves the transient directly onto that grid. But if I set the strength to 50%, it's only going to move it 50% of the way to the grid. All right, this is a way that we can preserve some of the feel of the original drum part. If the drummer's got a nice pocket, or if it's the kind of music that we don't want to be totally rigid, this is one of the ways we can go about fine-tuning the feel. So rather than setting it to 100%, maybe we only wanted it to be quantized 83% of the way, and now it's just about on the grid, but with some push and pull still in there. For our purposes here, we don't want that. We're going full grid, baby. So there it is. And now we need to fill in these annoying little gaps. So with the audio selected, we go to Edit Smoothing, and you'll see we have an option for fill gaps or fill and crossfade. So if I tell it to fill and crossfade, you'll see this gap here is going to be filled, and then a crossfade will appear. That's pretty convenient, but I'm a control freak. So I prefer to simply use the fill gaps command, and then I like to create my own special custom crossfades using the batch fade command in Pro Tools. So if you press Command F, it brings up this window, and from this window, you can do all kinds of custom fade work. So I don't need fade ins or fade outs. I only want crossfades. So I'm going to make sure Create New Crossfades is selected. This is a very important point. Placement should be pre-slice. I'm going to show you why real quick. Let's say that I have a 50 millisecond fade, and it's going to go right in the middle of this edit. You'll notice that the fade now envelops part of my transient. That means my transient just got turned down a little bit, and that means my drums are going to be a little bit less punchy. So we don't want that. Instead, we're going to tell the Pro Tools to put the fade pre-splice, and in doing so, this line is going to be, this cut here, this edit point is going to be the rightmost, which way are you guys looking at me? I'm not sure. In any case, it's going to be the rightmost edge of my crossfade. So when I tell it OK, you'll notice that the fade was created before the edit. This helps to, if not ensure, at least minimize the issue where a crossfade ends up sort of enveloping part of your transient and causing a less punchy result, or causing sometimes some odd distortions. Sometimes you'll notice when there's two transients right next to each other between the clips, for example, there's this transient, and on the preceding clip, this transient, which is just a smidge before it. If I put the crossfade on here, you'll notice we're getting two transients. That's basically the same transient quickly repeating over the course of the two edits. That's a bad thing. So let's undo all that. We don't want any of that mess. We want batch fades. 50 milliseconds is probably a little bit long for my fades. Not the end of the world, but it might sound a little funky. We're going to make sure this is set to pre-slice. Maybe you want to play a little bit with the shapes, you know, find that super cool shape that defines your drum sound, whatever it may be. Press OK. Now all of the gaps have been filled in, you'll notice, and there's fades at every single slice. And let's take a listen back. play that against a click track just for the purposes of demonstration here, so you can really hear the timing. Sounds good. For comparison, I'm going to play you the unedited of the same against the click. So again, you can hear that he's playing really tightly, but there is a little bit of this going on between the click and the drums, as you would expect with a human being playing. Beat Detective has fully resolved that. This opens up a lot of creative possibilities for things like playing drum loops along with the performance, or maybe you have some sequence keyboards, you need everything to be super tight, so on and so forth. So, last couple orders of business with Beat Detective. We're going to listen for any glitches or issues with the edit. A lot of times these will present as clicks and pops, or you might hear like a double hit, you know, where the two transients are still audible, you know, in really quick succession, one right after the other, that sort of thing. So we'll take a listen through for that, fix anything that we find. So right off the bat, I feel like I'm hearing like a double ride cymbal, right? You can kind of see there's two ride transients right in there. Simple solution, just move the crossfade a little bit so that it doesn't contain those double transients. I'm going to play that a couple times so you can hear the difference. Let me kill the click track too. All right, before it was like this. It's like almost like a chirping kind of sound on this particular ride sound. Hopefully that's coming through on your end. And we'll listen some more. There's another one here. Okay, this is because of a flam between the drum and the cymbal, right? So the cymbal's happening a little bit earlier than the drum. The drum got quantized, it got put right on the grid. The cymbal was a little early. And this is something that can be fixed, but it's pretty difficult to do with a stereo file. When we get into the multi-track Beat Detective, we will look at some techniques for fixing that up. Okay, I just want to say real quick that you should not count on having to do so few fixes after putting your crossfades into the Beat Detective. This is a testament to the skill of this particular drummer. Typically, I'm finding one of these clicks or pops or sort of awkward transients every few seconds. It needs a little bit of finesse. And again, the better the drummer, the less of this you'll have to do. So only having those two moments of chirpy ride cymbal is a real testament to this player. I would say that you can count on a lot more troubleshooting than that in your life as a drum editor. So final step here is I want to consolidate all this into one long piece of audio, rather than Pro Tools trying to grab all these different slices, and which might live on all different parts of your hard drive, and it's trying to play all this information back and taxing your CPU and so on and so forth. I just want to consolidate all that and have it be done. But what if I want to go back because I hear a mistake I made in the edit? Well, simple solution. Duplicate the playlist. You might name it something like Beat Detective Unrendered. Okay. Then you can go back to your main playlist, select the whole thing, and using the consolidate audio key command, which is Option Shift 3, we get shiny new files, very tidy, right on the grid. Everything is hunky-dory. Okay. That's it for the basics of Beat Detective. We'll get into the heavy-duty stuff in another video. So hopefully I'll see you again there, virtually speaking. And as always, if there are questions, we can go over some of this stuff in the classroom. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good one.